Do we have Elaine? I thought I saw Elaine, but now I don't. Oh, there she is. Great. All right. All right. Well, hello, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started with our work session. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent.
Here.
Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
All present.
Okay, first up, it looks like Steve Burgos has joined us from his basement. With a welcome sign behind him. And Haley Falconer here to see if anybody has any questions from the memos that we've received of late related to the water renewal utility planning.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
not a question, but a comment. The memos that we've received that we're talking about, we've gotten a couple of emails about this, are available on the city's website and can be found there. So the people who are looking for them or want to know what the council's homework is can go online and find it.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
again, not a question, but just a comment. I want to thank Haley and Steve for walking through some of those earlier and really providing a lot of information and responding to our resident concerns that we've seen so far as we embark on our water renewal plan. So I just want to commend their work on that.
Well, it looks like you both got off easy, but not really, because those memos have been encyclopedias that you've been writing. Thanks for being here, and we will see you again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, we're on next Tuesday, Mayor, for the recommended approach.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Bye-bye. Take care.
Stay.
All right, next up, Eric's not here, so Eric must be on Zoom as well. Eric Bemoria. Oh, no, you're here.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm here.
I've got Eric's names here for the interim budget changes.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of City Council. I believe you've had a chance to review the interim budget changes. However, I would like to point out that on item number 4 for the Heyman House, there was a slight reduction in the request. The request is for $97,950. It's just as a result of a late payment that came through for the Fire Station 9. But other than that, everything else, I can stand for questions if needed.
Yes, go ahead.
Hearing no questions, I move that we approve the interim budget changes as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Council President, we can see you talking. It looks like you're not, you're
I was muted.
There you
Can
go.
you hear me now? Sorry.
Okay. I think you voted yes, correct?
Yes.
Great.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, we have the quarterly report presentation. Everyone, there is, of course, an online version that you could link through from the agenda, but I think if you've come through the office, there you had a hard copy as well. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council, members of the council. Yes, the third quarter financial report, I think you may have just gotten the books today. The electronic copy is in the agenda packet, but this is what the cover looks like. And as usual, I have a few slides to go through, and we're also going to give you some view of our forecast for the year. General fund, starting with revenues, we have a number of things that are moving, but all in all, things are looking acceptable given the sudden recession. Property tax has held up quite well. It's slightly behind last year, but it's pretty much where it normally is. Sales tax has held up exceptionally well given the sudden recession. We actually projected to be a little over budget. The budget was a little conservative and did include a slight possibility of recession, which has happened. Development fees, we also project to be slightly over budget. The year started very strong and then it has slowed, but it's still doing quite well. Franchise fees are going to be down. Liquor tax is going to be up. You are probably aware that losses in liquor sales at establishments has been more than offset by retail liquor sales. People are buying it and taking it home. Department revenue is where we have some significant erosion in parks. We've been doing some work there. I'll have a little bit more information in the forecast, but we're down several million there just in parks revenue with all the shuttered programs. Fines and forfeitures are also down given less activity, less traffic. But other than that, revenues are doing acceptable. General fund expenditures, when we look at this at a high level, we've done quite well with some cost savings. We're ahead of where we were last year when you look at just some trends and some numbers. We still got some vacancies. The organization has made efforts to reduce costs. And so we've done well there. And we also have pandemic related costs that are in there that we've had to bear. So the next slide now gets into where we think we're going to end the year. We've spent quite a bit of time working with the departments and the finance managers and looked particularly close at different accounting units within parks. And when we look at roughly a 3 to 4 million revenue shortfall in parks, and then we offset that with some above budget revenues projected for development fees, sales tax, and liquor tax, and throw in a number of other things, we think will be about 4 or 5 million down for the year in revenues. So again, that is an acceptable result given what we first thought might happen, and some of our revenues have been holding up quite well. Then when we look at expense savings, given organizational efforts there and vacancies and other things, we actually project we'll be in the $8 to $10 million range for expense savings. And that would be even higher if we didn't have pandemic expenses that we've been paying. So just on our net position on revenues and expenses, we expect will be in the $4 to $5 million range at this point. That also could change with cost discipline the last month of the year here, the number of rebudgets we do at year end and other things, but we feel fairly comfortable that we're going to be in that range. Then we also have projected federal reimbursement under the CARES Act and other federal reimbursement programs. Right now, we're projecting that to be in the $2 to $3 million range. So from a net forecast, we think we'll be in the $6 to $8 million range when we report back with the year-end report in 3 months. Switching to just a few economic brief highlights that is in the back of your book, the economic brief. Just thought I would touch on unemployment. These 3 graphs show Idaho and the nation for the April, May, and June, and you can see with the initial economic shock and then some improvement each month since. Boise for July, we're at June, we were at 5.7%. And the rest of Idaho is actually a little bit better than that. And then notice the country as a whole is more than twice that at 11%. So we've not been affected as much as the rest of the country. And then we just saw a preliminary reading for July, and Boise's unemployment has come down to 5.1%. So this has been better than I expected. I think some of it is there were just a number of vacancies. Companies before the pandemic hit were still looking to hire, couldn't hire. So I think that is helping that come down a little faster than we might have otherwise thought. This slide just starts with the June numbers in the upper left graph, which I just showed you on the previous slide. And then for comparison, you can see where we were a year ago. We were at 2.3% unemployment, exceptionally low. Now we're at 5.7%. The country again was at 3.8% versus 11.2% for June. So there is the impact, the delta that we need to get back to or get close to where we were at some point to restore the employment. And then comparing our June unemployment for our metropolitan statistical area to other Western cities, you can see we're doing quite well. We're among the lowest in the country. I think this is just due to being more of a remote city and not closer to the coast or large cities, which have had more effect due to the pandemic. And you'll see we're at 5.7%. Salt Lake City is 6.2%. All the other cities in the chart are 8%, 9%, and above. So again, we haven't been affected as much with employment losses. Other economic brief highlights: development activity has continued. The pace has slowed down. In talking with the planning development folks and looking at the pipeline, we are optimistic that things will hopefully start to pick up, but that does continue. Housing inventory is very low again. Prices continue to move upward, at least partly due to exceptionally low mortgage rates. The median home sales price really shot up the first half of the year. Homes are getting bid up. Surprising, but that is how that is going right now. Sales tax, again, has held up very well. In the second quarter, receipts were actually up. We were thinking they might be down, and considerably down given what happened during the Great Recession. Quarterly airport traffic was less than 20% of what it was a year ago for the quarter. By June, it had come up to nearly 30%. So hopefully that will continue moving up as more people travel and feel safe traveling. Other economic measures like consumer sentiment are down significantly. And then the last point, for the calendar year 2020, gross domestic product is projected to be down 6.1%. With a 3.7% growth coming out of that for calendar year 2021. So when I look to sum this up, we're doing better than I think we thought, but there's still a lot of economic uncertainty, and I think it's just going to take a while for it to sort itself out. So
Madam Mayor?
Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. So my question, I just wondered if we have any idea on the sales tax revenue, if that has continued so strong, because people, although I know people are buying a lot online, there also seems to be a lot more attention being paid to shopping locally. And I wonder, do we have any idea, are sales actually up that much, or is there a shift in behavior?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, yes, good question. I think some of it is just due to retail has done very well and local. I found myself looking at what gets charged sales tax and what doesn't, and I think it's services don't get charged, but groceries do. So cleaned out grocery shelves mean people are buying lots and stocking up. I think that's part of it. Certainly there's some lost retail out there for certain things, but it's surprising to me that it's held up that well. I will see if I can get a little bit more context on where that's coming from, but that's our best guess, is that it's just due to people stocking up on a lot of essentials.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Go ahead.
I don't have a question, but just a quick comment. I wanted to thank you for putting together all of these economic indicators around employment. One of the trends that I'm seeing here is that we've seen a really sharp decline in accommodation and food services and other services in employment. And I just wanted to point out that a lot of our neighboring states still have many more restrictions in these areas than we do. And they're therefore in a better position as far as pandemic control than we are. So I just wanted to point out that there's a human side to these economic indicators also. And there's a lot behind those numbers. So while it's great to say, oh, yay, we have low unemployment, as opposed to Oregon that has about twice as much as us, I want to point out that we're in a very unique time. And I think that the human part of that can't be ignored in this conversation.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember, yes, I think there are certainly some trade-offs and potential risk that goes with that. The other thing is, when you reopen, it doesn't necessarily mean your customers are all going to come back, and a lot comes down to customer confidence to come into an eating establishment or something. But yes, that's where the job losses are really showing up, or have showed up, or hopefully coming back, or in the eating and drinking establishments and things like that. So my last slide here is just a summary. And again, overall operating revenue is below budget, but less than we first thought. Expenditures are trending significantly below budget, more than offsetting the revenue that we're short. And then we're looking at federal reimbursement that will also help solidify the city's financial situation. And then just with all the economic indicators and such, there's just, again, significant economic uncertainty. My sense is we're not out of the woods. It's just going to take some time to sort itself out and see where things go. So with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, go ahead. Or did we lose you? Council President,
your question maybe for you more than, and for all of us, I guess.
Council President.
I put on my headphones thinking that would be better. Is that better?
We can hear you and see you now, although you look frozen. It seems as we've had some internet trouble today. I wonder if it's just an unsteady internet.
I'll turn my video off for now. So the question is, given the budget that we built, we still had some holes in it, especially finding savings with priority-based budgeting. So I just think it would behoove us to have some discussion over the next few months as we approach end of year, what we're actually going to do with any end of year savings if they materialize like it looks like they may, given this report. So I just wanted to put that on the table.
Great, thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I was wondering, in terms of those unemployment numbers, do we have an indication of what the income levels are that aren't doing so great, or the ones that are doing great in our area? Do we know who's taking advantage of unemployment, or those who are not needing to? Do we have any indication about those income levels?
Madam Mayor, Council Member, nothing hard numbers, but everything I read suggests that the job losses have disproportionately affected those in the lower income levels, the jobs in restaurants and things like that. The jobs where you need to be on site and do things, hotels, for example, if their business is way down. So if you look at more of your white collar jobs, which tend to pay more, those jobs are more easily done remotely and on computers and such. So yes, there is definitely an apparent much higher impact on those lower income levels. I think the unemployment benefits with the enhancement has probably done a great deal to help these people get by.
Okay.
And if you look at property tax, we thought there might be more people not being able to pay their property tax on time, and we're really not seeing a lot of that, but more people in the lower income levels rent. And I'm sure a lot of those people are just getting by.
Just a quick follow-up, Madam Mayor, can you anticipate at what point we're going to hit critical mass where it starts to become visibly an issue, where we start to see a change in our day-to-day lives, where people are going to be needing that critical help?
There's been talk in Washington of a second round of stimulus back in July that hasn't really happened. This is part of the uncertainty we see is in a few months, we're going to have an election. The politics may be contentious. When a vaccine comes out will probably be a turning point. And even right now, when can the schools open, or do they stay open if they're deciding to open now, are all key considerations. Hopefully the economy keeps improving and we keep seeing some improvement there where that helps people get back to work, provided it's safe. But it's a day-to-day thing with seeing if the virus is improving and how we're managing it, or if it continues to increase and cause people to stay home.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? All right, good. Thank you. Next up, Carl, oh, there you are, Carl, on the screen, with a presentation on the West Side West Side Park Public Art Design Recommendation. Welcome.
Madam Mayor, members of council, thank you. Should I be sharing my screen for the presentation?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Madam Mayor, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm here seeking feedback and an affirmation of direction on the recommendation that we received for the public art component for the West Side Park. I'm going to start with a quick background and then move into an overview of the design concept, and then we can go into questions and comments from there. So a quick background on how we have arrived at the recommendation today is that in 2018, CCDC, the Parks Department, and Arts and History began a partnership around developing this new West Side Park. It was determined through public feedback that public art was a highly desirable component of this new park. And so at that point in time in 2018, the park design had already begun, and the Parks Department, in partnership with CCDC, had gone out to the public to identify features and functions of this new park. A water feature actually scored nearly as high as public art did in desires for functionality and usability of the park. And so in 2019, the city entered into a funding agreement, a T4 funding agreement with CCDC to outline $200,000 for an artist contract for the development of public art at the park. We convened a community-based selection panel, which represented members from the Arts and History Commission, the Arts and History Advisory Team, the CCDC Board, Parks and Rec, project stakeholders, and 2 members from the local arts community to come together to help us craft an artist RFQ. We released that RFQ in summer of 2019, and then had a finalist interview process. We identified 3 finalist artists from the original qualification round and invited those artists to engage in interviews with the selection committee. And from that interview round, artist Matthew Mazzotto, who's pictured here, was selected for the project. Matthew comes to us with a fairly extensive background in public art, working really in community collaborative projects across the country. And he also comes with the support of 2 different fellowships from the Guggenheim and from Harvard. Matthew then, before the design process began, Matthew traveled here to Boise in February of this year and hosted what he coined as a public or an outdoor living room. We essentially staged a living room set up out on 8th Street by the escalator in Main Marketplace, and met with and invited residents to join us in conversation about important characteristics and values of the city. The conversation wasn't strictly focused on the public art part of sort of the vibe of Boise. During his visit, he was here for 3 days. We hosted the outdoor living room. We also met individually one-on-one with city leaders, both related to CCDC, the city, and other cultural organizations to collect further feedback. We also met with the design team, which was already in place, led by CCDC and the Parks Department. After collecting all the input from the community, Matthew started to engage with the design team and he came up with multiple design options that were worked through with both the selection committee, project stakeholders, and the design team. And we ultimately whittled those designs down to 2 different design directions. And it was around that time that the CCDC board decided to eliminate the water feature. It's actually a fog feature for the park. And that freed up some additional budget that was allocated for park features. And they determined that it was appropriate to reallocate that addition that should have been spent on the fog feature to the public art project. And so they identified an additional $150,000 for the artist contract. And so we came back to City Council at the last session to amend that T4 agreement between the city and CCDC to increase Matthew's overall contract to $350,000. Along with that agreement, there's also outlined additional budget to help support the construction of foundations and also the installation process of bringing the work to the park. So Matthew went back and reworked the two design options that had received the favor of the selection committee and the project stakeholders to reflect that increase in budget. And we then presented those two design options to the community through a public feedback form. We hosted that forum on the Arts and History website. It was promoted out through both Arts and History, Parks, CCDC, and city social media, and it was also carried by a couple of the local media outlets. The feedback form was open for just about 2 weeks, or just over 2 weeks. And through that time, we received just under 200 comments about the design options. In the breakdown of the comments, we received an overwhelming majority for the concept that I'll present today, the gentle breeze concept. And the rest of the breakdown, the other concept received a very small favor of the community. And then there was a couple comments that were generally against the project in both concepts. And then there was a couple comments that were in support of either option. We took all of this feedback along with the two design concepts and presented all of this information to the original community selection panel to put forward a recommendation. And through an extensive discussion, we actually arrived, surprisingly, as these processes go, at a consensus with a 12-member panel in support of the design concept that I'll present. This recommendation was brought forward to both the Arts and History Commission and to the CCDC board for feedback, and both bodies approved the design recommendation that I'm bringing forward today. So the concept that we have forward from the selection committee, the commission, Arts and History Commission, and the CCDC board is titled Gentle Breeze. And it presents itself as an abstract sculptural tree form. It's roughly 23 feet tall and 30 inches in diameter and full round, or 30 feet in diameter, excuse me. And it sits atop of what's proposed at a 60-inch land-formed berm. And so the berm was identified to increase the scale and the height and the engagement around the artwork. It helps to elevate the work so that it's visible as you approach the park. It references the surrounding foothills and recreational experiences. It features an articulated canopy of pink leaves, which respond to the wind. So each leaf is individually articulated so that as the wind blows through this corridor, the entire structure will respond to the environment that it's in. It also has suspended back-to-back park bench swings, so as to provide interaction, gathering, and play. As well, the structure overall serves as a shade structure for the park, which was deemed to be really important as the other actual trees within the park mature over time before they're able to provide substantial shade. Finally, it creates an icon for both the park and the West Side District and a means of wayfinding. I'm going to continue to show a couple different renderings and cover a couple of the design principles that Matthew Mizzotto came up with. The design principles are highlighted in bold with a brief descriptor, and I'll elaborate on each of these. So the original concept, or the concept that was arrived at for Gentle Breeze, was to really capture the vibe of Boise. He was trying to capture the essence of the slow pace of life here, the niceness of Boise kind. The aesthetics, the original design concept for the park was to create an oasis in the West Side District, which at this point in time is largely surface parking and undeveloped lots. And also to create, there was a desire to create sort of a playful, childlike experience without having a specific play structure. It was really important for this park to be contemporary and modern. And so trying to create a childlike experience for everyone to engage in. And then the icon is a connection to the surrounding nature. So the tree form, of course, plays off the City of Trees moniker for the city of Boise. It references the extensive park resources that we have in the city, the green belt, and all points of recreational activities that people come to Boise to access. Here's a nice overhead view that positions the artwork within the footprint of the park and within the context of the surrounding built environment. And it was really important to Matthew to balance the scale in the context of this park between the Boise Cascade building to the north and the Raffinelli Nahas building that's currently under construction just to the south. And to balance that density of building with a human scaled experience. It was acknowledged and discussed that the average visitor or citizen rarely has the opportunity to occupy a lot of these businesses or office spaces, and to create something that was specifically built and developed and scaled to the human experience in the city was really important. And the idea, of course, is seeding the natural or a nod to the natural environment within the park. The accessibility is really important, not pictured here in what will be under work should this concept be approved, is a fully accessible ADA pathway that will lead park visitors from at grade on the sidewalk or in the hardscaped areas of the park to the top of the berm. So there's different concepts that are currently in play right now, but there will be a way for everyone to access the very top and access the swings. So we're currently collaborating with parks and risk and safety on the standards for ensuring that everyone can enjoy this work. So that covered the accessibility. It also it's bringing a whimsical, playful nature to the park. It's a functional space, so it's not just a decorative piece of work to be looked at. And it was really important that, again, this work speak to the contemporary nature, not only of the adjacent buildings, but also of the aspirations of the future of the West Side District. Pending any feedback and the affirmation today, we would bring a formal resolution back to City Council in September to approve the design. And pending those two steps, we would then do design refinement. So working with fabricators to identify material choices, working through structural engineering, working through permitting with the city. In the winter, it's anticipated that we'd move into construction coordination, fabrication of the work, and then install the work to align with the dedication of the park in spring 2021. So with that, I will stand for any questions or feedback.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Carl, thank you for the presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting Matthew when he came to town. He seemed to be very invested in connecting with the community to find out what we would like to see in his public art piece. And seeing the examples of the other public art pieces that he's done. I think I mentioned this during either another work session or during council when we were shown some of his other pieces that I can't remember being in a room where we've looked at a prospective art piece and have heard people audibly, inhale with excitement and surprise at the piece. And if there's one thing I've learned in the last 2.5 years that I've had the pleasure and honor of being on this council, and also having the opportunity to be the liaison to the Arts and History Commission, is that sometimes renderings, they really don't do the art piece justice. I will admit that the suffrage quilt that we're going to be unveiling tomorrow didn't really grab me on paper. And then when I saw it installed on the south side of our City Hall building, it takes my breath away. And I think it's stunning and beautiful. So I know that we have had some comments, at least from one public member. I don't know if we've gotten others. I've only seen the one critical of the color and critical that it's a fabricated tree when here we are in the city of trees wanting more real trees. But I love it. I think any opportunity that we have in our city to embrace more color in a sea of concrete and grays and browns, I'm all for. And I also like the childlike quality. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but there have been several times I've just wanted to go swing on a swing. And this seems to welcome that, not just of children, but of adults. So I'm very excited about this piece.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, thank you for your comments. I just wanted to respond to your comment on the colors. Pink was chosen in one of the earlier iterations of this design concept. Matthew had rendered a cherry blossom tree, and the feedback we received at the time was that it had to be more abstract than actual representational of a tree. But the pink color was sort of latched onto through that process because it was a bold statement and a color that we don't typically encounter, and something that could be potentially awe-inspiring. As well, it does really well contrast the color palette of the adjacent built environment.
Carl, if I could just give one, and maybe, not to disregard that one comment, if we may be so bold to give some feedback in regards to that. I love pink. Pink is one of my favorite colors, but I like a particular kind of pink. And I kind of like the more raspberry vibe of pink. I think the person referenced this pink as Pepto-Bismol pink. So again, I love pink. I love bright colors. Would it be possible for us to get a range of pinks to consider? I don't know if it's appropriate. You'll have to forgive my naivete when it comes to giving feedback on somebody's art piece, but perhaps we could have that be part of the feedback we give. Maybe it's not bad to have pink. Maybe it's the right shade of pink. I don't know.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, absolutely. And I welcome any feedback at this point before we move into design refinements. And we did have extensive discussions about finding the right pink, particularly given the light scenario at this particular site and in contrast to the built environment. And so should this concept proceed, we would do extensive material testing to really find the right pink for this space.
Thank you, Carl.
Madam Mayor?
Looks like Council President Clegg has something to say, and then Councilmember Halliburton, do you as well?
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So Carl, I appreciate this. I want to, just from a process standpoint, I want to ask one question, then I have some comments as well. We approved a resolution last week, 3/24/20. I had been asked to pull that resolution off and missed that request. And so I feel like we do need to pull it off this week and revote on it. But my question to you is, that resolution, as I understand it, was simply the funding resolution and not the resolution that approves the art as the concept design. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, that is correct. The
Okay.
resolution that was presented last week was strictly in relation to the amended funding agreement. And as I stated in my next steps, a future resolution would come forward to formally approve the design concept.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So here's my question. I also heard those comments about the color, and I really appreciate learning that it came out of a concept that included some cherry blossoms. And so I guess my comment back to that is that maybe instead of finding the right one color, and given the light and the play of light and the fact that these are going to move in the wind, it might be interesting to at least explore a concept that would have a range of pink colors on those, so that the play of light could actually even be more vibrant and more enlivening of the space. Is that something that you could share with the artist as feedback?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, absolutely. And that a part of some of the feedback that we did receive through the selection committee and the approval bodies was to explore some alternate canopy color palettes. And initially, early on in some of the early iterations, a variety of pink tones was included in the canopy. And there were some comments that stated that it kind of degraded the contemporary feel of the tree. However, we have tasked the artist with exploring alternate color palettes based on the feedback of the color. So should we determine there are some feasible options, I'd be happy to come back and provide an update. We will continue to use the selection committee and the project team as a sounding board to make these decisions and explore options.
And then my second question has to do with the site itself and the berm. And I understand the concept of why the berm, but I guess given that that is going to be at the entrance to this quite small space in a very urban area, the benefit of that is that it sort of shields that space and makes it a little quieter and more private. I guess the flip side of that is that in an urban space, it takes the eyes off of the park a bit. And just want to ensure that as we do this, we make sure that the rest of the park really does have the opportunity to have eyes on all of the parks so that we don't lose the sort of security aspect of ensuring that the park is visible. Does that make sense?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, yes, absolutely. And we have had, we've started having conversations about the visibility, especially in, the potential for, security drive-bys by Boise Police Department to ensure that there are, safe, accessible points of visibility into the park. And there was a number of early iterations that were moved away from with the berm or other structures to ensure that the safety was upheld. And just recently this week, in looking at a couple options for ADA accessibility to the top of the berm, quite a few options were shot down because they obscured certain perspectives or points of view into the park.
Okay, great. I'm glad you're considering it. And then finally, in losing the water feature, we lose a bit of the idea of this as an oasis. And I'm wondering, without a big water feature, are there any plans to ensure that there will be some cooling feature in this park on a hot summer day, especially early on before we get some trees planted? I'm not sure it's going to be as inviting as it might be without some water of some kind.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, I'm not aware of any additional water features or any other cooling aspects that are incorporated into the park design. However, I would be happy to follow up on that in discussions with the park team.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Or Councilman Halliburton, and then we're gonna we've got just a couple more minutes on this, everybody.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Carl, and I won't take up a lot of your time here. I had the opportunity to be part of some of the planning process, or at least to be able to give some input early on. And I was really impressed with how well the job I think our city did in putting that together. I guess the thing that I just want to comment on, my question was going to be about accessibility, but you'd already covered that earlier, is just how important it is for us to continue to invest in our city and invest in art and culture in our city, especially during this time. And the fact that we have some stuff as far as the timeline goes in spring of 2021 and the ability to move forward with this, I feel like is so important. And I know that as I've traveled around from all sorts of different cities, a lot of the times the public art is the thing that I remember. And I think that having something iconic like this in the middle of downtown Boise and investing in that right now is really pretty great. And so I just wanted to commend the city and everybody who's been involved for moving forward with this.
Madam Mayor. I'm going to keep this super quick because I know that we're running up against time. I love the proximity of this tree to Tree Fort when we have Tree Fort again. And I think that the interplay between that is going to be really cool. Secondly, I have this actual tree in my backyard, and I invite anyone to come over in the month of May approximately and see the actual weeping cherry tree that is this tree. The artist is welcome to come to my backyard and see the various colors that it has, but it is a magic tree. So I'm really excited to see kind of the cartoon version of my magic tree in downtown Boise for all to enjoy all the time. And now I think I want to put swings underneath my actual tree.
Madam Mayor, very briefly, TJ here. I think it's a great job. I really, most of all, appreciate all the input that went into this, that has gone into it to date, Carl, and I really like the project. The color kind of got me at first, but I'm buying in, and I like Councilmember Sanchez said, sometimes it takes seeing it once it's complete. It would be nice to continue to delve into the color aspect and maybe different shades of pink, or maybe continue to make sure we get the right one, but I really like the project. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Just to wrap up, a couple things. Public art's hard, and we have committees for a reason that are tasked with talking with, getting to know, and then better understanding why and what an artist might bring forward. And when I first looked at this, the color took me by surprise, but I think it's because often we expect to see something in one way, and that's the beauty of art, is that it makes us notice, think, kind of check ourselves and our assumptions, and then through that we have the experience with it. I kept thinking about in the spring how everybody loves, once I had that initial shock around the color, everybody loves the pink flowering trees in our city. And that's really what this is. And the berms, I think, invite you to come in my experience with that, granted it's just print, is that is the oasis. There's a tree with swings, it's playful, and then the berms create a space that you either want to lay back on or sit on while you're enjoying lunch and watching people interact with this art. So I think it's, I appreciate the work of the committee, Arts and History, and everybody that went into this, and look forward to seeing what's next, the next rendition of it as we have further conversation. Thank you, everybody. Okay, next up. Thanks, Carl. See you later.
Mayor, Council, thank you.
Bye-bye. We have, Maureen's here, but is Andrea? Oh, great. We've got Andrea online on Zoom for a conversation about a proposed housing bonus ordinance. And just before Andrea starts, I just wanted to say a couple things. First off, having some sort of bonus or incentive program that will help us get at our goal of having more affordable housing come on the market is really important to me, and I think to many of you. And this is the first attempt at that, at the ordinance that would get at that goal of a home for everyone, focusing on affordability in some areas. I really intend for this to be an opportunity to hear feedback from council members on what staff with Clarion and Associates is proposing right now. Let's have a conversation about ideas, potential improvements, and then from there you'll see process-wise where we go to the public. And I want to make sure too that we have built in the opportunity to have the conversation with those that would be prone to build housing that's affordable for everyone, to make sure that we get this right, because we don't want to go through this exercise and not end up with changes in our ordinance, incentives out there that get us what we want. And what we're seeking is housing that's affordable at different price points for our residents. So thanks, Andrea and Mark, for joining us today.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am Andrea Tuning, and I am representing the Planning and Development Services Division. And we're just going to talk a little bit about the housing bonus ordinance and how it is currently evolving. Just to give you a little bit of history, we originally began in October of 2019, knowing that the city was going to move forward with a zoning ordinance rewrite to really provide a zoning tool that would allow us to accomplish the city goals. And the mayor knew that the zoning ordinance rewrite was going to take approximately 2 to 3 years, and also acknowledged that we had an urgent need for housing throughout the city of Boise. And to address that urgent housing goal, she asked us to look at things a little bit differently and ask if there were innovative ways in which we could achieve providing additional housing stock throughout the city of Boise. As a result of that, our team got together and we established the housing bonus ordinance. And this is really an innovative tool that we can use to develop an incentive package for individuals to develop products that help us achieve our public policy goals. And as we developed it further, we identified the public benefits that we could address through the housing bonus ordinance. And we felt that affordable housing was a key component, also transit supportive development, and then the adaptive reuse of a number of our existing buildings throughout the city of Boise. And when we asked individuals, hey, what is truly important to you as you are developing? And we heard time and time again that density was really critical, and so was time. And when we asked further, how can we help you achieve density? We heard that if we can get additional height, if we can get a reduction in parking, and you can save us time, we can start to build additional units for the citizens of the city of Boise. And really the most powerful bonuses have been identified to be the additional height, parking, as well as time. And so we took those and said, well, what incentives could we apply to these policies and goals that we have as a city? And when we started to talk about affordable housing, we said, hey, if you are willing to provide us a certain amount of affordable housing, we can offer you the additional building height that you're seeking. We can also offer you a parking reduction. And in certain circumstances, we could also eliminate the process for you to go through the time restrictions that it takes to get through the hearing process. And we can send you through administratively. And we heard positive feedback from that. Then we also said, okay, well, with transit supportive, this is where we really want to target growth in specific locations. And we can also offer additional building height and perhaps a parking reduction as well. Whereas the adaptive reuse, we can offer a parking reduction. And in certain circumstances, we could also offer the administrative review process as well. And so when we looked at affordable housing, we wanted the affordable housing to be provided citywide. And while affordable housing is a key component, we also want to make sure that we're providing housing at all price points for all individuals of all ages and individuals going throughout multiple stages of their life. And really, when we looked at the affordable housing piece, we said, depending on whether you're willing to provide 10, 15, or 20% of your units to be affordable, we can offer you these key incentives. And so this is a chart that really kind of looks at what the incentives are that we've initially identified that could be a potential. And so when we look at, if there's a housing bonus available, what could we do? And we talked about increasing that height. So based on various zones, you would be able to actually add anywhere between 1 or even 2 additional floors to accommodate for additional housing units. If in the event that you have existing units on the site, or even perhaps you have existing affordable housing, it's important to preserve that. And so we think that that's even more critical. And so rather than just give you a single floor in the R3 zone, we're willing to give you an additional 2 floors for housing. And then, if you have under 50 dwelling units, we're also willing to look at this administratively. Really, we wanted to give developers a predictable and objective way to achieve housing. And, our communications didn't just stop with developers and, hey, what can we offer you? We also have heard time and time again from existing neighborhoods and individuals and residents say, hey, we're not opposed to housing. We just want it to transition into our neighborhoods. We want that sense of compatibility. And so you'll notice with both the affordable housing component as well as the transit supportive component, there is a table note that really talks about that if you are adjacent to a residential zone that has a single family home or a duplex, the maximum height of 35 feet should be applicable. And really what that does is that doesn't give you a height allowance near those property lines where you'd be transitioning into some of those existing single family residential zones. When we look at transit supportive development, it's a little bit different than the affordable housing, because affordable housing, we've said that that's applicable citywide. You can do that anywhere in the right zone, you can do that. Transit supportive development is really supporting transit viability in targeted locations. And our goal is to create housing in locations where people are near jobs, goods, and services. And that is intended to really have implications across the line, getting people out of their car, promoting walkability, allowing people access to transit, those types of things that we have been working so hard for. So if in this particular case, if you're located within a 1/4 mile of a regional activity center, which is identified by the green dot, and those are kind of dispersed citywide, as you notice, we can offer you some bonuses there. If you are located within an 1/8 of a mile of a community activity center, also dispersed throughout the city, we can also offer you some incentives in order to build housing products in these particular locations. So when we look at the chart here, you can note that it is across the city. So this will be citywide if you are in one of those targeted areas. And again, we are looking at increasing the height for particular buildings that might be located in identified zones. Also really focusing on if you're able to preserve some of those existing units there, and then looking at a parking reduction as well. Again, we have that transitional piece to make sure that we're preserving those existing neighborhoods the best that we can. And our final option for a housing bonus would be for adaptive reuse. Really, the intent is to preserve and reuse our existing buildings in order to expand our housing supply. And so through the adaptive reuse in the traditional residential zones, we could allow for a 30% parking reduction. Whereas in your office or commercial zones, we can say we will accept the amount of parking that you have now, as long as you are not reducing or removing any parking. So yes, we want you to preserve that building, and we are willing to work with you in regard to your parking requirements. So this is a lot to take in, and this really is our first opportunity to show you how much we've progressed on the housing bonus ordinance in just a few weeks. I would like you to keep in mind that this is an evolving process. This is your first opportunity to look at that. And we're looking for your comments and your feedback to give us direction on how we can make it better. Have we met some of those ideal goals that you're looking for? Have we missed something? Really, we're hoping that you can share that with us. We'd love to hear your comments before we fully develop that ordinance. And as we do develop that ordinance further, I just kind of wanted to walk you through what's happening next. Where are we in our timeline? So we are early in the process. This is before anything happens. This is a draft, and we're here at the work session. We're going to be moving forward and taking your comments and compiling them into the draft document that we're going to be ready to submit in September. And so we will submit an actual proposal to amend Boise City Code. And at that time, we're going to make that open and available for public comment. And we're going to engage the public and hear what they have to say in regard to this. Do they believe that this is enough? And is this going to be effective? And so through September and October, we're going to be hearing what those feedback and that comment period, we want to hear everybody. We would then move forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission in November at a public hearing for their formal recommendation to you. And then we'll be back before you again in December, hopefully with a really good quality product that we all believe in, that is going to be effective in the interim as we develop our larger zoning code rewrite over the next 2 to 3 years. And then finally, after the city council has made their determination, if we feel comfortable moving forward, we would anticipate that we would have expedited readings. And so we would have those 3 legal readings occurring at one time and moving forward with the project in January. So we have a lot to look forward to, and this will not be your first time that you'll see us.
Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Andrea. I know a lot of work has gone into this quickly. I really appreciate it. I think for me, I'd like to ask a couple of fundamental questions and put those on the table so my fellow council members can also think about them, and then have some kind of specific questions about the ordinance and perhaps some ideas for some tweaks, some changes that I think may make it more palatable and maybe more effective. So for me, the first fundamental question is, the policy purpose of this, and we need to get more housing built. And so for me, the fundamentally most important part of this is figuring out ways to ensure that it's easier to get more units built in the places where we think that's appropriate and where we think the citizens also will accept and believe that that's appropriate. Of course, in addition to that, we want to preserve existing buildings. There's an environmental benefit of that. And we think fundamentally we can probably get more housing built more quickly if we adaptively reuse some buildings rather than tear them down and start over from scratch. In the midst of that, we might actually preserve some trees as well. So of course, that's near and dear to my heart. And then finally, of course, we want more affordable housing. Affordability, as we saw from the memo, is the most difficult part of this. And I'm not sure that we're quite there yet on the affordability. And I say that because as I've looked around the state, as folks have tried to figure out how to incentivize affordable housing, we've not seen a lot of success stories. Part of that is because Idaho Constitution and Idaho statute is pretty restrictive and not very supportive of that. Part of it is that maybe the incentives haven't been the right ones. So question before this, are these the right incentives or not? So for me, coming from that standpoint, I wanted to say that so you'd understand where I was coming from. I have a couple of observations. The first one is that in essence, this is a 3-part ordinance. It has the affordability piece with its own restrictions and its own incentives. It has the transit-oriented piece with its restrictions and incentives, and then it has the adaptive reuse piece. I'm wondering if it might be more simple and perhaps more effective to actually have only two pieces to this, and maybe even two separate sections in the ordinance that come together. And for me, I bring that forward because I think affordability could lay on top of any of this, and it shouldn't necessarily be its own separate thing. So I'm wondering if we had an ordinance that allowed more units to get built in the appropriate places, like the Transit Supportive Activity Center, one that's being proposed. And so that's one incentive. If you build in this place and we identify it, I think, frankly, we need to map it much better than what we've proposed at this point, maybe even to the extent of identifying it as an overlay or a series of overlays that also perhaps include the corridors. But if we were to do that and then say to someone, and in addition, if you do some of those units as permanently affordable units, we'll give you X other incentive, in this case, potentially the administrative review, which saves time, or I would even be open to actually putting a cash incentive on the table if we find that might be something that would actually get to affordability. I'd say the same with the adaptive reuse. And with the adaptive reuse, I think we could actually loosen the requirements on it a bit. I think there is room for parking reduction. I think there is room for height, as long as we handle it correctly with transitions, because this one is restricted only to those buildings which aren't currently being used as residential buildings. So we're talking old strip malls, we're talking churches, older churches, we're talking maybe a warehouse that's still tucked into a neighborhood somewhere. Those kinds of buildings being adaptively reused into housing, I think there's plenty of opportunity in some cases either to expand the footprint of the building and go up, or actually go up on top of the existing building to some extent. And so I'd like to see the opportunity to do that, because we'd probably get more out of it. And the beauty of that is these are already non-conforming uses, probably in an R1 zone or an R2 zone, some of the other zones, but I'm thinking particularly of our R1A, B, C zones. Those would be non-conforming uses. They become conforming in some sense because they become residential, but we could allow maybe height if it's in the right place, parking reductions if we can also show that there are reasons to believe that people have accessibility to transit, et cetera, from that location. And then again, on top of that, if you do that and you also want affordability, oh, by the way, we'll give you an easier review process, or we'll give you a cash incentive of some kind to get to the affordability. So I say that because right now the affordability piece is slated to be allowed in all R2 zones, which are actually pretty extensive around the city and include, to some extent, some interior neighborhoods. And I think those interior neighborhoods are the places where we'll get the most concern from existing residents about the impact it will have on their neighborhood. And then the very last thing, and I'll shut up and let other people talk, in the case of the transition, right now it says if any portion of the building is adjacent to, I think we need to get much more specific with that. I think we need to say that nothing can be more than 35 feet in height within X number of feet of an adjacent single family home. I just think I think it's the right thing to do. I just really concerned with the way it's written. I think it's so subjective, it would be really hard to use administratively. So there's my comments.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah, just a second. I want to jump in there. I mean, this is the thing, Council President, is that I think that maybe housing staff needs to send us those numbers of the number of units that we're seeing every year and where we're falling short. Because we set out a goal for a number of units per year. We set out a goal for affordability. The affordability units were never met. So in my mind, this isn't and also if you want to do affordability, we want housing that's affordable at different levels. And I'm afraid that if we make that and also, then it's lost primacy. And agree with you that we don't necessarily want things internal to neighborhoods. My whole hope with this was that we'd see zones along transit corridors and external to neighborhoods. But my guess is that if you have any multifamily unit housing proposal that comes forward that gets these added density bonuses just for the purpose of being housing, if they're internal to the neighborhood, we'll have pushback. And I don't want to end up creating a system where we're just seeing more of what we've been seeing, rather than making it truly easier and more appetizing to a builder to include a certain number of units within their developments that are at 80% AMI, what have you, depending on, as this proposes, what the market needs at the time. Because we are not making the targets that were set out years ago in terms of the number of units at different AMIs that we need in this community to be able to house all of our residents or the people that work here.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I could respond real quickly to that. I don't disagree with you. I know that we want more affordability. I guess my concern is, as I've looked around the state, the ones that are aimed at that to date haven't really achieved that goal. So I'm throwing this out there because I think that really is the conversation we need to have. How is it? And I'll tell you this, I'm concerned that if we tie affordability to the number of units on a particular piece of land, then we've said that which we all talk about as density, but it's much more than that, is only valuable if there's affordability. And I'm worried that we'll get into a circle where we'll have more difficulty deciding where that should occur over the long term in the bigger zoning rewrite, because we've created this idea that it only should happen in return for. And I'm not convinced that's the right way. I totally understand your concerns. I think that we're probably saying the same things and trying to discern what's the best way to make that happen. But I am concerned that because we haven't allowed the right kind of housing, we haven't seen housing that's naturally affordable, if you know what I mean.
But in the last couple of years, in the last 5 years, ever since we established that goal of number of units per year, we have allowed different types of housing that could, in theory, be affordable. However, it hasn't been tied to salary pieces. And I'm not proposing that we say all of the units in a place must be 80%, et cetera. I'm saying, like what you said, why don't we look at how we incentivize if there's 200 units being proposed, 20 of them, 10% say, are at 80%, et cetera. So that we're slowly like ticking away at the number that has never been achieved that we know that we need annually. And the other cities in the state have done other things. McCall, Ketchum, et cetera, have done requirements. Yeah. This is modeled after other states. I don't think we can look at what has been done by cities where they've required and the constitutional questions around that for the answer. This is trying to get it in a different way, but I want to make sure that we're only going to get it. It's just like in the PUDs where we've had where you offer a tot lot and something hard to do. Like people are going to do the tot lot because it's the easy thing to do to then, be considered a PUD. I want to make sure that we aren't watering down the options such that they're going to do what's easiest or most impactful long run for their own development and not actually get at what we're chasing, which is achieving, I think it was 300 units a year that we set out as a city multiple years ago, saying we have to see at affordable levels that we just haven't seen. But this is exactly why we have work sessions, because these conversations
exactly.
And I hope that in response to that, in response to all this, staff can bring us back some more information, some background, maybe carry into background on where this is been used, how it's worked, so that we can better understand that and really get at making sure that if we're going to write something, we're not doing it just, we need housing, yes, but not just for housing's sakes, to get at what we're really trying to change, which is access to units at affordable prices.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Andrea, thank you for your presentation. One of the things I really liked about Council President Clegg's initiative for the 100,000 trees we want to see planted?
Yes.
I like that there's a number and there's a goal for that. What I would like to see, if it's possible, is for us to identify, and I don't know, maybe it's already been done, is to identify those areas where we could have affordable housing. So I think it was Council President Clegg who made mention of buildings that we have that could be repurposed for affordable housing. Is there a possibility that we can be doing that we can identify those areas that we already have in the city where we would like to see affordable housing? I would have to agree with the mayor. I really want to see us put our shoulder into that. And, I'm thinking about some of the council meetings we've had recently where we've had folks be granted, I believe, conditional use permits, and then they come back because they violated it or they didn't comply with it. And I think it's time that we do some things where we really do hold people accountable to the gifts that we give them. And Boise is growing. I think we will find people who will comply, but I also think it's time, especially after the conversation we just had earlier in the work session, things are going to get more difficult for folks who are the working poor, and we really need to step it up and do what we can to make sure that we're there for them. And there is no time like the present because it's coming up on us fast. So I think we need to embrace the times that we're living in, and that is that we be innovative and brave and bold. So I would like to see that. I would like to see those areas in our city where we can possibly repurpose buildings to be affordable housing. I think it's becoming quite urgent. It was before COVID and now even more so. So thank you, Andrea.
Madam Mayor.
I'm going to go with Councilman Bajan and then Hallie Burton.
Great.
Thanks.
I'm yelling. I don't know. I should be.
A couple of things. Thank you, Andrea. One of the things that I've thought for a really long time is that the streamlining the process piece is a good one. I think I used to call it like a fast-tracked administrative process. And the reason I think it's a good one, an important one, more important, I think, sometimes than rejiggering the zoning codes or tweaking, special conditional uses of a particular zone, is that it almost always works better to incentivize the behavior you want rather than to try to regulate the behavior you want, for many reasons, right? It's easier to encourage than it is to coerce. When I think about the development community and what that community needs to be incentivized to create the types of housing that we want, obviously, first it's money. They're a business, and they're going to follow the rational decision processes that a business would make. But the other, I think, is certainly promptness in approving and moving things through a process, and predictability. And that's something that we didn't hit on here. If we create an administrative process that moves very quickly but has a tremendous amount of discretion in it, such that a developer is looking at a project on the front end, they see this administrative process, and they can't tell what's going to happen in that process, that's uncertainty, and that's business risk, and that is a compelling reason to perhaps just go build something simpler out on the edge of town. So in addition to a streamlined process that moves quickly, one that is relatively certain, one that creates a framework where if you do A, B, C, this will be approved because the decision makers don't have discretion, or because we're not going to layer it with many different levels of input, I think would help a lot. The goal is to incentivize people to want to do things, and the way to do that is to reduce the amount of risk, increase the predictability, and increase the speed at which it happens. So on the streamlined administrative process piece, those are my thoughts. I think that's a fantastic idea, very important. Seems like it's very much within our control and our authority to do. And I would encourage, my input is, as we're thinking about how to structure that, in addition to making it prompt and efficient, let's also try to make it as predictable and certain as we can.
Madam Mayor. Thanks, Madam Mayor. And I didn't feel like you were yelling from our end on Zoom. You sound
I
normal
realize I'm
voice
kind of
tone.
yelling at Patrick because I'm yelling at the mic from far
Everybody
away.
yells at me. It's fine.
Yeah. Patrick already brought up, one thing to mention is just the importance of streamlining that process. And that's something that I've heard from developers over and over again. Andrea, I guess I did have a couple of questions. And one question was just, are we looking at really focusing on our larger multi-unit complexes and developments when we're talking about this? Or is there room for even some of our smaller developments that are taking place inside of neighborhoods? So like if somebody's developing a 4-unit, 8-unit, 12-unit complex, is that in this proposed ordinance as well?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Halliburton, it would be applicable to everything in the R2, R3 zone. It really is across the board. So we took a look at all of the applicable zones. So 15.8% of the city's properties would fall under this particular ordinance. And so anything that you see as a highlighted orange, pink, or purple, they would be available to utilize these. If you take a look, I mean, really, you follow some specific corridors, which is key to us. So in this particular case, you'll notice that you'll see State Street along the north, you'll see Fairview, and then you also see Overland Road there as a primary corridor. So we would see it citywide, and it's really difficult because you want affordable housing citywide and you want to have different products available for different people citywide. You don't want them in one particular location. However, you do want to be utilizing your infrastructure the best that you possibly can, whether that's sewer, water, or our transportation system. Based on where we're seeing these identified zones, we've got available infrastructure, and we believe that we should be utilizing it to our best of our ability.
Thank you, Andrea. I appreciate that. And I guess one of the reasons why I asked that question is even looking at your map right now, I'm kind of looking at some of these gaps over in the north end, the east end, the highlands, and areas like that. And I guess I see a real importance to make sure that we're doing our best to incentivize affordable housing at those areas as well, especially some of the more affluent neighborhoods where having mixed income at some of these local schools really could be a huge opportunity in these communities to have more mixed income in some of those areas. So if there's some ways to, yes, do this and explore ways to encourage some of that affordable housing and make sure that this isn't just for our larger units, but even some of our developments, our smaller developments in these other, smaller complexes. And I guess my second question then is when we're talking about, I guess mostly probably the reusing of buildings when we're talking about these incentives, are there also some ways of incentivizing non-displacement? So if there's people who are living in the buildings that are currently affordable, some incentives similar to the ones that you just put forward that would encourage keeping units for the current residents and potentially reusing some of that space. And I don't know if that's factored in to the ordinance or not.
I'm gonna jump in here just because I've been flagged for time. We have to talk about Our Path Home, and that's quite a while. So Andrea, rather than answering that, I'd ask that you add that into some of the follow-up information that you provide us with. My sense is that from the conversation today, you all have some more thinking to do, some things to incorporate, some questions to answer from all of us. And I'd propose also that the rest of the council, if any other thoughts come up, that you send them through Amanda over to Andrea so that they can be looked at and reviewed, and we'll have another conversation. So let's do step 2 of this as a follow-up before in response to kind of staff getting some time in response to the conversation we had today, then come back with us with a little bit further. And if not in person, then by memo that we can all respond to.
Madam Mayor, one question.
A question, and then I'll ask Andrea probably answer it later. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's my point. I will actually do that. I'll send my comments by email, but The only more pressing one I did want to note when I saw the dates, it seemed like the October and September dates seemed like they should be reversed, but in terms of getting input prior to writing the code. But because I think getting that input is going to be very important, but that's why I wanted to bring that point up now, and I'll send the rest of my comments by email. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea, very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Andrea.
All right, next up, for those of you that are, yes, Maureen's walking up. I don't know if you can see her because I don't see Council Chambers on the screen. So, but Maureen has just joined us here in person, and we are now going to be discussing having an update on our path home. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of City Council. Thanks for having me. I was hoping to get in front of you today to just do a little bit of a level set in terms of where we are with our path home. I think some of you are probably more familiar with this public-private partnership than others. So I was hoping to just do some high-level conversation with you all about where we are in terms of responding to the needs of those that are unhoused in our community, and then where we're specifically focusing our efforts currently. As you may well know, the City of Boise is the lead agency for our path home, and I just wanted to orient you quickly to the idea that we operate from this service model and philosophy that permanent housing is the solution to homelessness. Certainly, it's a complicated issue. It's multi-layered. There's a lot of folks and a lot of different agencies working on it, but I offer that not to oversimplify it, but rather to sort of orient us towards the ultimate goal and vision for a home for everyone. The agencies that are a part of this public-private partnership, it's also important to understand, we all now work from one prioritized queue, whereas we used to, each nonprofit partner maintain their own wait list. We now have one wait list that we prioritize for everyone experiencing homelessness throughout Ada County, so not just the City of Boise. Our response focuses on being coordinated, on responding quickly, and then of course having or providing the right size and right scope of services. And you can imagine dealing with humans and they have messy lives, that gets difficult at times. So we're meeting these goals to varying degrees. It sort of depends on which part of the continuum of care that you're working within, which brings me to sort of what our target population is specifically. So these numbers, we can kind of debate where they, if they're exactly right or sort of the precision of these numbers, but they come from the American Community Survey. And basically they say that most households in Ada County are stably housed. About 27% of households are cost burden, their housing is cost burden, and then less than 1% is literally unhoused. So that 27% at risk, I want to draw your attention to it a little bit, because for owner-occupied homes, it's something closer to 20%. For renter-occupied homes, that number starts to gravitate more towards like a 44%, 45% at risk, or rent burdened, I should say. Again, to continue to provide just a little bit of context, I think this is clear now more so than ever, especially in this pandemic that we're living in right now, that housing and health go hand in hand. It's absolutely traumatic to live on the street, and it's also traumatic to live in emergency shelter. Therefore, our goal, the partnership's goal, is that every single person, every family in Ada County is safe, healthy, and housed. That's what we're working toward together. And certainly, I think it follows that you cannot be safe or healthy if you're not housed. Okay, so our housing strategies, what are we doing? The interventions that we offer that really are housing specific are fourfold. Some of these, a handful of these, are highly evidence-based. They have clear outcomes. Others are a bit more exploratory, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But these four, prevention, diversion, rapid resolution, and supportive housing, is where we are focusing our efforts on those at-risk households and those that are literally unhoused. Okay, so starting as far upstream as we're able to do prevention. The basic idea, of course, is to do just that, intervene upstream, keep people in their lease. That can and often does translate to a utility or rental payment. It can also translate to landlord mediation, some connections to community resources. There's sort of a broad swath of services that we provide. We want to be able to focus resources on those that are the most likely to experience literal homelessness, and we're challenged in doing that for a couple of reasons. First, certainly we don't have the resources to serve everybody that's at risk. If you take that 27% number, we're talking in the neighborhood of 20 to 25,000 households. Secondly, the evidence base around the factors that influence why a household would fall into literal homelessness is thin, and it's being built every day sort of as we speak. So what I mean by that is why a family would not be in shelter tonight on a Tuesday and then have to access that shelter on a Wednesday. There's not a clean sort of one-for-one relationship there. That pathway looks different for everyone. People may call a friend, they may stay with a family member, they might be able to afford a hotel for a few nights. However, I will say that currently the fund sources that we have for homelessness prevention are geared towards helping leaseholders. So we have this gap population of folks that are doubled up. They might be transitioning out of an institution. They might have experienced a job loss and then can't show income sustainability. And we do not have a fund source right now to serve that kind of gap population that's not leased up and can't show sustainable income. The other point I want to make about prevention, and I don't mean to get too far into the weeds with you all, I do want to keep it high level today and then respond to questions that you may have. But there's this idea around efficiency and effectiveness with prevention, and most certainly we want to be effective. We want to keep people off the street and out of shelter. However, most of the prevention work that we've done to date is something called universal prevention. And that means we serve anybody that shows up, anybody that raises their hand and says, hey, I need help. Universal prevention is effective, meaning that most of the people we intervene with don't then experience literal homelessness, but it's inefficient because most of those folks weren't going to anyway. It doesn't sort of allow for that resiliency, and it doesn't really allow for that opportunity for households to self-resolve and just figure it out. So what we're working toward now, and I'll talk more about this in a bit, but we're working towards exploring a more targeted approach that better balances efficiency and effectiveness. Okay, so diversion, this is all about a problem-solving conversation. If we didn't get to you in time and we weren't able to prevent that instance of homelessness, and you're now presenting either at coordinated entry, which we'll talk about if you haven't heard of it, or at the emergency shelter, this is a problem-solving conversation at the front door of the homeless services system. So we should be having these conversations at coordinated entry. We should be having them at the emergency shelter. We should be having them with social workers that may call from the hospital and say, hey, I need to discharge a patient. He has nowhere to go. I want to be clear that this is not a denial of service, but rather it's a conversation about what can we connect you with today? What's better than you entering shelter tonight? Oftentimes in other communities, we've seen a lot of success with this, but it comes along, a flexible fund source comes alongside it, and we don't have that pot of money here yet. Rapid resolution is really diversion's neighbor, so to speak, and it tries to move households back into stable housing as quickly as possible. Most often that happens through first month's rent security deposit, maybe an application fee. This is for folks that have income. More than likely, they've recently fallen into homelessness and have sustainable income to get them right back out. We actually have $100,000 from the city of Boise, thanks to mayor and council, to put towards rapid resolution, particularly for our unsheltered population, but we also broadened the scope a little bit to serve those that are in shelter as well, in light of what we're dealing with COVID. So ideally, we have that flexible fund source, and that kind of sits alongside the pot of money that we would have for diversion. And then supportive housing, this is probably the one that you all are the most supportive with, or familiar with, excuse me. This is the resource for our more or most vulnerable clients. Most of them don't have income or haven't been connected to an income source yet. More than likely have a disability, have been experiencing homelessness for a long time. New Path and Valor Point are examples. Those fall under the umbrella of what's called permanent supportive housing. So it's an expensive intervention, but it's effective. We also have an intervention called rapid rehousing, and that provides sort of more midterm support, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, up to 2 years, depending on the needs of the household. We're kind of working on, in some cases, getting them started in rapid rehousing, seeing how they do, and then sort of leveling up if we need to, and transitioning them to a more permanent subsidy if they need that rental support and/or the case management. So those were the access strategy, or excuse me, the housing strategies, and these are really the access strategies. So how are we doing it? And I've talked a little bit already about prevention and diversion, so I won't go back over those. But if we don't catch you there, and we're not able to intervene before you experience literal homelessness, how do you access rapid resolution? How do you access supportive housing? So one of those is through coordinated entry. It is the access point into the homeless services system. It's where we prioritize households for supportive housing. That was the wait list or queue that I referred to earlier, the prioritized queue. Street outreach is designed to build rapport, develop relationships with people, particularly those that are unsheltered, that are otherwise disconnected from, say, a case manager in the shelter. And that's really an effort to draw those folks into services so we can assess just what it is that they need and what would resolve their housing crisis. And then emergency shelters manage our night-by-night crisis. So they're providing a safe place to stay. They have been tremendous during our response to COVID-19, and I give them a lot of credit for the very low number of people experiencing homelessness that have actually contracted COVID. So we have gaps in the system. Certainly we have funding gaps. We have some procedural and programmatic and policy gaps. We certainly don't have all of the mechanisms in place yet to sort of bridge between interventions, but that is what some of our focus has been. So let me just run you through quickly what the strategic initiatives are and our efforts under each of those, and then I'm happy to answer any questions or feel free to interrupt. So current efforts. First one listed here, aligning city funds, and this also has to do with the Neighbors in Need Code amendment, so I think we'll talk more about, and then you might see again next week. This really is in an effort to do just what the slide says there, align city funds. So we have a number of funding streams that serve a homeless services purpose. However, those historically have been tucked in under our federal funds that serve a public service. So the idea is that we would bring alignment with these different funding streams under the Our Path Home Executive Committee, that they would be the body that makes recommendations to mayor and council, knowing that they have kind of that breadth and depth of knowledge around what our strategic plan is and what our funding priorities are, and that then mayor and council would ultimately approve those. So happy to answer more questions about that. We're also currently in the midst of a midterm, I would say, response to COVID. You probably are all well aware that we've secured a couple of hotels, one for our families and medically fragile. That's also opened up some space at Interfaith for them to socially distance a little better and also serve more people. And then we have a second hotel location for anyone who is presumptive positive or positive for COVID-19. Interfaith is also managing that hotel site for us. We're also reevaluating the coordinated entry. We've branded coordinated entry Our Path Home Connect. We have a prioritization formula, and we're just doing another look at that through a racial equity lens. Of course, or it may not be surprising that minorities experience homelessness at a disproportionate rate than their white counterparts. We have an Our Path Home outreach team. It's new as of February, and we are looking into, they have had a lot of success so far, and we're looking into how we can broaden their reach, broaden their scope, working closely with BPD, behavioral health from the Department of Health and Welfare, of course, our outreach team and our coordinated entry team, Ada County EMS. So we're working on how we might be able to develop something that's cross-agency to make sure that we're continuing to all row in the same direction and that we're outreaching, or that we're reaching out to the right folks. And then lastly, this sort of dovetails with the conversation you all were just having, but we're exploring how to create a business plan for landlord and property partner participation. What I think that might look like is dedicated units, and we are trying to put together kind of something that acknowledges a landlord's bottom line. It's one thing to sort of attend to their heartstrings, but another to acknowledge and take into consideration their bottom line. What would it take for them to dedicate units to our partnership so that we know when there's a vacancy there, that we can fill that vacancy with somebody on our queue, with a household on our queue. And then I would be remiss if I didn't sort of let you know that the lenses through which we're trying to do this work is first and foremost the lived experience of our clients. Secondly, strengthening our relationships between our partner agencies. Being data-driven. 3 years ago, for all intents and purposes, we didn't have data, and now we have a lot of it, and we're in a much better position to make strategic decisions. And then, of course, equity. Okay, so you have probably heard a bit about this already. We are underway with a campaign to end family homelessness. We're sort of in that planning stage of it and moving into sort of getting up and running. Our leadership cabinet is formed. Their focus area is fundraising. We have a handful of small contracts. The county holds one with DBD Group on that fundraising piece. They're sort of leading out, facilitating the leadership cabinet. The Home Partnership Foundation is our fiscal agent. And then Agnew Beck has come alongside us for the other two focus areas, those being storytelling. So what exactly are the core messages and how do we want to deliver that to the community and ask for their partnership, speaking of. And then a solutions implementation team. I mentioned we have gaps. We have a lot of ideas about how we can close those, and it will involve some policy and procedural changes and then some flexible funding as well. The goal there is to achieve net zero. It's also termed functional zero. So prevent more families from even having to access the homeless services system. But then if they do, the number that access should equal, we should have the system capacity to house them. So A should equal B, the number accessing equals the number housed. And we want to do that within 30 days. This is where we have been in 2019. This is just families. We prevented homelessness for 109 families last year. That number is in fact larger, but a couple of our prevention providers don't enter data into our homeless management information system. This number will be eclipsed this year. Last year, we did 291 assessments with families at coordinated entry. We housed 101 of them. At any given time, there was 237 families on our queue. That number is a little inflated because we don't always have time to quote unquote scrub the queue. So a lot of families will figure it out. And then when we are able to circle back to them, we can pull them on the list because they've identified their own solution. But that was the average last year. And the big maybe eyesore here is it's taking us a long time right now. So we need to kind of open some new checkout lanes, if you will, through the campaign to get families into housing. Reduce first-time homelessness. The vast majority of people entering the system are experiencing homelessness for the first time. So we've been doing a lot of work. We have a work group that meets about bi-weekly, and I spoke to this earlier, so I won't belabor it, but there's some nuances here between instability prevention, which happens pretty far upstream, and literal homeless prevention, which is that more targeted approach. So we're looking into that and making some good headway there. And then we're exploring a diversion strategy. In the fall, we'll be bringing in an expert from the National Alliance to End Homelessness to do a training with all our frontline staff on what this problem-solving conversation looks like. And then also exploring that gap population I mentioned earlier. They're not likely to be the population that you can cut a check to for first month's rent and deposit or back rent and say, good luck and thank you. They're going to need a little bit of a longer term support, but there's some tension, I'll say, between priorities because we've got highly vulnerable people on the street and arguably less vulnerable people maybe in hotels or doubled up. So how do you sort of distribute funds to their highest and best use? We're still kind of working on that. And then lastly, scaling supportive housing. We know supportive housing works. We know that there's a handful of people that really struggle in housing and that we really struggle to meet their needs. Specifically as an example, there's a couple of folks that have cycled in and out of New Path, or we've tried them in another setting, and it's really, really difficult. But for most people, by and large, supportive housing works, and our data demonstrates that. So again, working on creating bridges between fund sources. Right now, we're sort of beholden to, primarily federal rules and regulations because that's our primary fund source. Ensuring the right amount of resources at the right time. This is a staff capacity issue. We have some really talented staff, but keying in on what we call progressive engagement and knowing when is the right time to exit someone from a program is tough. And it takes experienced and talented staff to do that. Finding sustainable funding for support services. We're kind of at the mercy right now of a bit of a charity approach there, and we need to find something that's more strategic, more sustainable. A lot of other communities and states are doing it through Medicaid expansion. That's a heavier lift in Idaho, so we're exploring, how we can make that work and/or work around that. Of course, completing another permanent housing project rises to the top for us in terms of priorities. And then again, not to get too specific here, but we don't have that midterm support, what we call rapid rehousing for single adults. It exists for families. That's one reason we're starting on the family side with the campaign. However, that's a significant gap on the adult only side. And that was kind of an abrupt end, but I'm happy to stand for any questions that you might have.
Go ahead, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much, Maureen. I loved getting this update on what you all have been up to. I know that this has been a lot of work, developing kind of the framework and the plan to go forward and crunching all that data that you now have, which is fantastic. What would you say is kind of the biggest, what's your top priority of how council could assist in this effort?
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem Woodings, that's a great question. I think there's some absolutely low-hanging fruit that we can get at right away. The first thing that comes to mind is aligning the internal sort of fund sources and these kind of different strings that we have out there that are funding different either positions or programs that are nonprofits. So that comes to mind right away. Two, and this is sort of squishy, but continuing to lean on and help us build the scaffolding of the partnership. And then I think if that paves way for our executive committee to come back and say to you, Mayor, Council, these are our priorities and this is our plan, I would hope that that would give you the comfort going forward that these are some priorities we can go after. Mayor and Council have already pledged support for the campaign to end family homelessness, and we owe you something on that. I need to sort of circle back on where specifically that funding will go. And then I'm really eager and excited to talk through a pipeline for supportive housing. New Path and Valor Point happens through sort of brute strength, and I would like to get a strategic plan going and set some actionable, workable goals that, you know, we're going to do 5 projects in 5 years, or we're going to do 500 units in X amount of time.
Madam Mayor, I just wanted to follow up on, I think a lot of people don't think about the work that you all are doing as a strategic investment in our city. And we can save so much money downstream and help so many more people by doing some of this upstream work. So I think it's really important to view it that way. I think the sticker shock is sometimes a lot, but when you look at how much money is saved, for example, by Our Path Home, by New Path. I was out with Officer Nixon on a bike along a couple of weeks ago, and he gave me just one example of a gentleman who's been living at New Path, who had, before he was at New Path, had several interventions per year, and just kind of ticking up the bill of those interventions was like, oh my goodness, we were probably spending $100,000 a year on this, you know, for this one gentleman intervening in ways that were not healthy for him. And now he's at New Path, and that, you know, that bill and his quality of life is just so much improved. So I think that with the community thinking about it in those terms, rather than just what the upfront cost is, I think it's really a great investment of, you know, taxpayer funds, and also a great investment in our residents who just need a hand up. So thank you for all of your work. And if you need any help, just let me know.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Okay, I heard Councilmember Sanchez, and then Clegg, was that you next?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maureen. This is powerful information and very timely. I wanted to thank you for acknowledging the equity piece. And I would very much be interested in offering any sort of guidance about how to do outreach to those communities. Part of my past life was working for the Intermountain Fair Housing Council. And so this issue of housing discrimination is very near and dear to my heart, and was a fair housing tester. And so I think people would be surprised because we do live in a kind city, but we do have instances of discrimination against housing, against people of color and other marginalized groups. And so I very much would like to talk to you about that, about how to reach those communities.
Thank you. Council President? Oh, you're muted.
I unmuted before, and then I decided I should mute again while Lisa was talking. Sorry about that. So thanks again, Maureen. I appreciate this. I think some of this information is probably new for some of our council members, and you did a really thorough job painting the full picture of the things we do. So my questions and comments are what kind of along the lines of Councilmember Wooding's, what's most valuable for us, but I'd like to maybe expand the lens a little bit as we talk about that and figure out what are all of the things that need done, not just the ones that potentially the city is being asked to do, but things the state could do. You mentioned Medicaid expansion, for instance, things the county potentially can do now that Medicaid expansion is happening in a way that may free up some of their other funds. Other community groups and other community members. And I don't expect you to have any answers to that tonight, but I'm hoping, as you talked about, one of the things that would be most valuable for us as council members is building that collaboration, building those partnerships, that we can begin working as a council with you to paint that bigger picture so that we can begin to understand what's the best place for us to play, what's the best place for another of our partners to play. Does that make sense to you?
Madam Mayor, President Clegg, it does entirely. And I think it's a both and. I suspect there would be additional asks for mayor and council that are sort of specific. And then also some more direction and maybe more frequent updates about what the partnership is up to, why we're taking this approach, and sort of, again, I use this term with funding specifically, but how we can use you to leverage some of those partnerships and put them to their highest and best use, if you will. I also think I probably owe you some core messaging. It's taken us a long time to develop some of that. Council Pro Tem Woodings hit on it. There is a public service benefit that has been articulated specifically for New Path, but not overall. We have some preliminary numbers that we think cost savings are going to be on the campaign to end family homelessness, and they are significant. So I think if I can come back to you with sort of some clear messages about what you can help communicate to the community, I think that'd be really helpful.
Great, great. So here's my two specific questions.
Sure.
You talked about what's next in terms of supportive housing, permanent supportive housing. You mentioned a number that actually made my heart do a couple of jumps because I was hoping it wasn't that big. And I guess my question to you is, how many chronically homeless individuals do we have, having opened both New House and Valor Point, that are good candidates for that kind of permanent supportive housing? Not long-term acute care, but really permanent supportive housing. Do we have any idea what that number is?
Madam Mayor, President Clegg, I can get you that number. I hate to name a specific one here today, but I can get you that number. It does fluctuate. A couple of things. One, there is a very detailed and technical definition of chronic homelessness. And while I report out on that to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD has started to acknowledge that there is a subset of the population that doesn't meet the quote unquote record keeping requirements for chronic homelessness. But the fact of the matter is they've been experiencing homelessness for a very long time and they have a high service need. So let me take a look at our coordinated entry queue and confer with our shelter partners, and I can give you a point in time number, and it fluctuates. I wouldn't be scared of or put off by the number I threw out. It was just to kind of give you an idea of what we could work towards. But certainly we have started to evaluate the trends around coordinated entry. On any given night, there is several hundred, upwards of 1,000 folks experiencing homelessness in Ada County. And then that number grows if you include those that are doubled up or maybe hoteling for the night or a few nights. So I can, again, circle back to you and sort of give you a point in time. Here's what our count looks like today, or what it's looked like recently. It is going to change because of COVID. We're not quite sure how, but.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to be specific, but at least a range would be helpful. So then Medicaid expansion, you mentioned that. I guess I would tell you that's something I'm interested in. I do think it's something that for a portion of that population that may not be well suited to less intense support in the permanent supportive housing, I think we might really want to explore with the state. And I know it's kind of a heavy lift, but I wonder if we approach it as a demonstration or a pilot, if we might find more receptive partners. So I just want to let you know I'm very interested in that as a council member, if you need a champion on that particular issue.
We have an executive session, so we're going to have to cut off here because I think it's going to could potentially take the full half hour that we've got, or 25 minutes that we've got left now. Maureen, do you have some things that you could follow up with us on in terms of information? And it sounds to me like we probably want to have another work session at some point in the coming weeks or months on with some more detail on family homelessness, as well as the work that you and other city employees are doing to ensure that all the different pieces around housing and supports for families that impact homelessness are integrated.
Madam Mayor, will do. And thank you for having me. I'm happy to come back. And if you have questions, just float those my way and I can make sure to get those answered or incorporated next time we talk. Right.
And Madam Mayor, just to clarify, I think we're going to put off the 3 readings of the neighbor in need ordinance. Now that we've had this conversation, we can put it back on for next week. Is that true? I just wanted to clarify that. Okay,
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Yes. Great. Thanks.
Thank you. Madam Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead.
I move that we go into executive session to discuss pending probable litigation pursuant to Idaho Code 74-206-1-F.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. We'll be back at 6.